In the early 20th century, the world was plunged into chaos as World War I raged on. With millions of soldiers fighting on the front lines, the demand for munitions skyrocketed, and governments scrambled to meet the needs of their armies. In the United States, the war effort led to a significant shift in the workforce, as women took on new roles in the manufacturing industry. Among these women were the dial painters, tasked with applying glow-in-the-dark paint to watch faces and military instruments. At the time, the United States Radium Corporation, based in Orange, New Jersey, was one of the leading manufacturers of glow-in-the-dark paint. The company's product, known as Undark, was a mixture of radium and zinc sulfide, which emitted a radiant glow when exposed to light. Women, mostly in their teens and early 20s, were hired to paint the tiny watch faces, often using their tongues to shape the fine brushes into precise points. This technique, known as pointing, allowed for greater precision but also led to the women ingesting small amounts of radium daily. As the war effort intensified, the demand for glow-in-the-dark instruments increased, and the number of women employed by the United States Radium Corporation grew. The company touted the job as a patriotic duty, and many women saw it as an opportunity to contribute to the war effort and earn a steady income. However, unbeknownst to the women, their work would have devastating consequences, as the radium they ingested would slowly begin to destroy their bodies from the inside out. The women's work environment was often poorly ventilated, and the air was thick with radium dust. Despite the risks, the company provided little to no protection for the women, and they were not informed of the dangers associated with radium exposure. As the women continued to paint the watch faces, they began to notice strange occurrences, aching bones, fatigue, and unexplained illnesses. The once proud workers were about to become the unwitting victims of their own government's negligence. The radium used in the paint was obtained from carnotite, a mineral found in uranium ore. The extraction process was labor-intensive and expensive, but the resulting radium was highly prized for its luminescent properties. The United States Radium Corporation had cornered the market on radium, and its product was in high demand. As the company's profits soared, so did the number of women employed to paint the watch faces. But with each passing day, the women's exposure to radium increased, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shake the nation. The technology behind the luminescent watch faces was deceptively simple. A mixture of radium and zinc sulfide, combined with a binding agent, was applied to the watch hands and numerals using a small brush. The radium, with its half-life of 1,600 years, emitted alpha particles that excited the zinc sulfide, causing it to glow. This phenomenon, known as radioluminescence, allowed the watches to be read in the dark, a crucial feature for soldiers serving in the trenches of World War I. To create the paint, the United States Radium Corporation had developed a proprietary process that involved mixing the radium with other chemicals to enhance its luminescent properties. The resulting paint was highly effective, but it came with a terrible cost. The radium particles, once ingested or inhaled, would continue to emit alpha particles, causing irreparable damage to the surrounding tissue. As the women applied the paint to the watch faces, they would often moisten their brushes with their tongues, thereby ingesting small amounts of radium. Unbeknownst to them, this habit would prove to be their undoing. The company's instructions for applying the paint were woefully inadequate, and the women were not provided with any protective gear or warning of the dangers associated with radium exposure. The radium itself was a highly prized commodity, extracted from carnotite or through a labor-intensive process that involved crushing and treating the ore with acid. The resulting radium salts were then purified and sold to companies like the United States Radium Corporation, which would mix it with other chemicals to create the luminescent paint. The entire process, from extraction to application, was fraught with danger, and the women who worked with the paint were unwittingly at the forefront of this toxic industry. The devastating effects of radium exposure soon became apparent, as the women began to fall ill, one by one. At first, their symptoms were dismissed as mere fatigue or hysteria, but as the months went by, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. The women's jaws began to disintegrate, their teeth falling out, and their bones crumbling beneath their skin. They suffered from excruciating pain, anemia, and infertility, their bodies slowly succumbing to the ravages of radium poisoning. The first reported case was that of Catherine Donahue, a 35-year-old dial painter who began experiencing severe pain and swelling in her jaw. Her condition rapidly deteriorated, and she eventually lost her job, unable to continue working due to her debilitating symptoms. As more women came forward with similar complaints, it became clear that the radium paint was the culprit. The women's bodies were literally glowing in the dark, a grim testament to the toxic nature of the substance they had been working with. Despite the mounting evidence, the United States Radium Corporation refused to acknowledge the danger posed by their product, and the women were left to suffer in silence. The company's negligence was staggering, as they continued to prioritize profits over the health and well-being of their employees. The Radium Girls, as they came to be known, were the unwitting victims of a toxic industry that valued the glow of a watch face over the lives of its workers. Their struggles would eventually spark a national outcry, leading to significant changes in labor laws and worker safety regulations. The technology behind glow-in-the-dark watch faces seemed cutting-edge at the time, but it had severe limitations. The radium used in the paint was highly unstable, emitting ionizing radiation that could cause irreparable damage to human tissue. Moreover, the half-life of radium-226, the isotope used in the paint, was a staggering 1,600 years, meaning that even the smallest amounts could pose a significant threat to human health over time. Despite these risks, the United States Radium Corporation continued to market their product as safe, touting its luminescent properties as a major innovation in the field of watchmaking. However, the company's claims were based on incomplete and inaccurate data, which grossly underestimated the dangers of radium exposure. The women who painted the watch faces, often without proper training or protective gear, were the first to bear the brunt of this negligence. As the Radium Girls' health began to deteriorate, it became clear that the technology was not only flawed but also inherently deadly. The very properties that made radium useful for watchmaking, its ability to emit a steady, glowing light, also made it a ticking time bomb for those who handled it. The lack of understanding about radium's effects on human health, combined with the company's reckless disregard for safety protocols, created a perfect storm of suffering that would have far-reaching consequences for the women involved. The Radium Girls' struggles were not just a result of the technology itself, but also of the societal attitudes that governed women's roles in the workforce. Women were often relegated to low-paying, high-risk jobs with little to no protections or benefits. The Radium Girls case would eventually expose the darker side of the war effort, revealing a system that prioritized military production over the welfare of its workers. The Radium Girls case would eventually lead to significant changes in labor laws and worker safety regulations, but not before countless lives were forever altered. The women who suffered from radium poisoning, their bodies ravaged by the very substance they had once handled with such care, would never be the same. Many would succumb to their illnesses, their lives cut short by the very war effort they had once supported. Others would spend the rest of their days in pain, their bodies crippled by the effects of radium exposure. The Radium Girls' struggles also brought attention to the broader issues of worker exploitation and the lack of protections for women in the workforce. As the war effort drew to a close, the public began to question the true cost of military production, and the government was forced to confront the consequences of its actions. The Radium Girls case would eventually lead to the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a federal agency dedicated to protecting the rights and safety of American workers. But even as the Radium Girls case led to significant reforms, it also served as a stark reminder of the darker side of war. The very same government that had once hailed these women as patriots had also knowingly put them in harm's way, prioritizing military production over their welfare.